Producer Abonim B'nai Yeshivat. It's a little challenging to speak later in the afternoon. The one thing I know, not to quote the Chovos HaLevavos that I know, that was already mentioned twice. It should be mentioned a few times actually. It's a very, very fundamental Chovos HaLevavos. So years ago, many years ago, about 35 years ago, maybe a little less, maybe more, I was learning here in the Yeshiva at Ohr Somayach. I was one of my generation's, what they call kids at risk. Now I'm one of my generation's adults at risk. But in those days it wasn't as prevalent. And I decided that at a certain point I want to give learning another chance. So I came to Ohr Somayach. I was sitting right by that back pillar over there, right next to that back pillar. And I don't remember what we were, I think we were learning Kedushin. And one of the guys came over to me and he asked me if I would like to join a team, a group of Bachrim. We're going to go to play a basketball game against the Israeli Air Force. And the idea being that we were going to show them that not only we could top them in ruchnius, but we could top them in physical endeavors as well. And there was a liaison, or Somayach had somebody who there was a lot of one-way traffic with the Israeli Air Force. They would come to Ohr Somayach, they would never leave, and eventually they stopped the program for obvious reasons. And so I was sitting there, I was thinking of learning Kedushin, and it was very difficult. I had to pull myself away from my Gemara to go play basketball, what I wouldn't do for Torah. And we went to play a basketball game against the Israeli Air Force. We had to bring our passports to get onto these Air Force bases. We were very excited. And we went to show them, that not only we can, we've got them in ruchnius, but we've got them in all areas of life. So we went, we played a game, and we lost. Looking back, I could only describe it as a game of tackle basketball. It was the only time in my life I got fouled shooting a free throw. So after the game, we had a meeting with the base commander. The base commander, now you have to realize this is a man who's teaching Israeli pilots how to fly F-15s and F-16s. And he gave us a quick 15-minute lesson how to fly an F-15. I remember this man, we're going back well over 30 years. I still remember this man. I still remember what he looked like after seeing him for 15 minutes. He was one of those rare combinations of confidence, humility, and arrogance all rolled into one. And he told us something very interesting at the time. He told us that when a pilot is flying out over the horizon, the pilot's flying out over a body of water and the sky is blue above and the water is blue below, he could experience what's called vertigo. He loses any sense of direction. And they're taught in the Air Force that they have to set aside any of their instincts. That means that they may feel they pull the plane up or go down. They have to set aside their instincts and put all of their faith into the indicator on their panel. And if the panel says up, it's got to be up. If it says down, it's got to be down. So on the way back to the yeshiva, we were discussing, I never became a pilot, by the way, but we were discussing what he had told us, and it had to do with fear of heights. On the way back to the yeshiva, they were discussing what he had told us, and we figured that this was a perfect description of the situation in the world today. Situation of people who are hurtling through life at twice the speed of sound, with no direction, no compass to tell them what's right, what's wrong, what should be done, what should not be done. There's only one small group of people that has an indicator on the panel, which is Klal Yisrael. We have a Torah, we put blind faith into that Torah. Whatever the Torah tells us, regardless of what our instincts are, regardless of what we feel, we put our full faith in the Torah. Today, as was mentioned, I'm sure a couple of times today already, you have a generation of people, either kiruv rechokim, kiruv krovim. I refer to it as it's all under one umbrella of chinuch, because it means educating those who have not had education. Call it what you will, at whatever level it's a form of chinuch. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan was once bathing, the Warren Brother Matzia says Rabbi Yochanan was once bathing in the Jordan River, and Reish Lakish, who was the head of a gang of outlaws, jumped into the water to assault Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said to Reish Lakish, Chelech leoraisa. that strength that you demonstrated, apparently Reish Lakish made a tremendous jump into the water, said, Chelech le'oraisa, that strength, you ought to take that strength and channel it into Torah. So, Reish Lakish, one compliment deserves another. So he said to Rabbi Yochanan, Shufrech le'noshi. Rabbi Yochanan is very beautiful. And Reish Lakish said to Rabbi Yochanan, your beauty is wasted on you. Your beauty is more fit for women. Women care about beauty. So Rabbi Yochanan said, that's what he's interested in. He said to Reish Lakish, if you devote your life, dedicate your life to Torah, I'll let you marry my sister. It's a deal. They made a shidduch. Gemara does not report what Rabbi Yochanan's sister said. When Rabbi Yochanan came home, he said, okay, we're going to drink a l'chaim. Mazel tov. What's a mazel tov? You're a kala. Really? To who? Top bacher. Top of the FBI's 10 most wanted list. Right? Top is top. Doesn't matter. As long as he's top, she can tell her friends, top bacher. So, I'm sure that she had a mudas chacham, and she marries Reish Lakish, and Reish Lakish becomes Rabbi Yochanan's Talmud Chover, Rabbi Yochanan goes crazy when Reish Lakish is nifter. He can't find somebody to learn with. That's what the Gemara says. Nowadays, we do not have that option. Can't go making shidduchim in order to be vakar of people. That option doesn't exist. We have other options. We have other methods. We have other techniques. So we have to know the same way, if you were there, what chance would you have given Rabbi Yochanan to change a Reish Lakish who, at the point that he met him, was a gangster, he was an outlaw, and at that point, Rabbi Yochanan came up with something that was going to change Reish Lakish's life and ultimately the destiny of all of Klal Yisrael. What chance would you have given Rabbi Yochanan at that moment? And the answer is that we, even in our day and age, have seen things like that happen. They had Rav Chatzkel Levenstein once got into a cab, and the Israeli cab driver, I'm sure you know what it's like driving a cab in Israel, is something that's l'mala min hateva, that a man could drive so long without looking forward at all. And he gets into the cab, and immediately the cab driver turns and says, Harav, ani chayav lesaper lecha sipur. He tells Rav Chatzkel, I have to tell you. He says, well, okay, so like my friends and I, we finished the Israeli army, and then we went touring around the world. We were somewhere in the jungles of South America, and in the middle of the night, one of the guys woke up screaming, and he had a boa constrictor wrapped around him. One of those massive snakes, an anaconda, was wrapped around him, squeezing the life out of him. So we all tried pulling the snake off. We can't pull a boa constrictor off. We weren't sure what to do. One of our friends had his army-issued Uzi with him, and he was going to Uzi off the snake. He thought that might not be such a good idea. And we didn't know what to do. And finally, one of the guys says to him, Yigal, ata olech lamut, you're about to die. Lefachot tagid kriyat shema. So Yigal manages to fetch out, Shema Yisrael, can barely breathe. He says, Hashem echad. And as he says the words, Hashem echad, the snake releases him and it slithers off into the jungle. Harav, ani chayav lesaper lecha. From that day, Yigal became from. He covers his head. His wife is married. She covers her head. His kids cover their head. The house covers their head. They eat kosher. Oh, so Chatzkel goes, ooh. Wow. The ma'itcha, what about you? Ani, no, ze lo karali, ze karalo, ze lo ani, ze who? So he's wrong. He's wrong. So Yigal was inspired by a boa constrictor. This guy should have been inspired too. We had a Talmud once in Ohr Somayach years ago. Talmud was here, came in for a couple of weeks, was checking it out, wasn't interested, wasn't completely secular, wasn't interested. And he was here for a couple of weeks. And last Shabbos, he was going to leave on Sunday. Shabbos, he went to the Rabbanim here. He went to his house for Shabbos lunch. After the chol, the Rav bent down. He pulled out a bottle of Jack Daniels. The guy looks at him. He goes, "What? Rabbis drink Jack Daniels? I'm staying." He is today married. He's learning in Kollel, changed his name. He's now Yaakov Daniels, and he's what do you go completely from a bottle of Jack Daniels. Listen, that's a great way to do kira. So who would object? So the person never knows what it is. I had a guy once told me that he became from. I asked him what it was that did it for you. He said Purim. I said, what was it about Purim that inspired you? He said, I saw hundreds of drunk from Yeshivat Ohr walking the streets. I realized from people could be normal also. Right? Remember where he's coming from, 4 years in a college campus, so obviously that's all he's ever seen. Nope, that's normal. Nope, he became from. Somebody else became from me. Somebody asked him, what inspired you? He said it was Reb Shimon Eider Zatzal, his sefer on Hilchos Shabbos. He says he was looking through it, glancing through it, that inspired him to become frum. So what about Ilchus Shabbos did you find inspiring? He says specifically the laws of Borer. The laws of Borer, the driest, most technical area. He said, what about the laws of Borer did you find inspiring? He said, listen, no human being would care or could care if I pull my tomatoes away from my cucumbers and my cucumbers away from my tomatoes. Only a God could have made up a law like that. It's got to be true. So you never know. You never know. Different. Some people Jack Daniel, some people Allah the Borer. It doesn't matter. The point is that we live in a door where we never know. And as Rav Kulgan mentioned, we have an obligation. Our obligation is to try. So I just want to explain to you something that's often overlooked. You know, there's a mice I told once, I think many of you have heard it. It's documented in one of Rav Yitzchak Zilberstein's Svarim. A man walked into an automobile dealership on a Friday afternoon, late Friday afternoon, bought a car, brand new car for $50,000. He goes straight from the automobile dealership, he goes straight to a used car dealer. He says to the guy, listen, I just bought this car. I'll sell it to you for $20,000. Guy says, why would you want to sell a $50,000 car for $20,000? He says, don't ask questions, you make $30,000. Guy says, I don't know, it sounds fishy to me, let me think about it. He walks out of the office, calls the police. So they got a funny situation. Cop comes down, he says to the guy, why do you want to sell a $50,000 car for $20,000? He smiles at the cop, he says, none of your business. Policemen don't like that. Trust me, from personal experience, they don't like that. So he says to him, let me see your credit card, I'm going to make it my business. He takes his credit card, he calls the company. Company's closed. Late Friday afternoon, they're closed for the weekend. He says to the guy, I'm going to have to lock you up. Locks him up over the weekend. Monday morning, he calls the company. Sure enough, he's got a credit line, everything's in order, no problem. Comes back to the guy, says, here's your credit card, you're free to go. The guy smiles again at the cop, he says, thank you very much. Goes straight to an attorney's office, and he files a lawsuit against the police department for false arrest. He had planned the entire thing, start to finish, to do something that looks very questionable, very suspicious, to sell a $50,000 car for $20,000. He did it on the weekend when he knew the company would be closed, so he would get maximum lockup time in prison over the weekend, and then in court he could plead emotional trauma and distress, and he got a settlement of $3.5 million. Documented story. You like that, huh? Yeah, you like that. Yeah. $3.5 million. Documented story. That's why America is called the land of opportunity. Documented story. So Rav Zilberstein brings it down as a tremendous Musar Haskell. What's the Musar Haskell? The Musar Haskell is that sometimes in life you think you know the value. You look at a mitzvah, Talmud Torah, every word of Torah is a mitzvah. We think we know the value. We're clueless. You think you know the value of chesed, tefillah, whatever it is a person stuck or whatever a person does. If somebody would ask you, was the car worth $50,000? Was it worth $20,000? Car is worth $3.5 million. Yeah, obviously you're not allowed to do it. You name us das and all that. Well, we'll figure out ahead there. But $3.5 million, that's what the car was worth. So there's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos that says the following. Mishnah says, "Avizor b'mitzakala k'v'chamura, she'inat hayodea matan schoron shel mitzvahs." Be careful with a severe mitzvah, like an easier mitzvah. You don't know the schar, matan schoron shel mitzvahs. So the Farshim asks, why does it say matan schoron? It should just say schoron she'inat hayodea schoron shel mitzvahs. Why does it say matan schoron shel mitzvahs? So imagine the following. Guy walks into a hard-working, middle-class Jew, says to him, listen, my father is deathly ill. We need $50,000 for emergency surgery. Can you help me out? Guy says, look, it's a lot of money. Give me a week. I'll see what I can do. He runs around $18 here, $20 here, $15 here. Goes to his brother-in-law, father-in-law, goes to everybody. Barely sleeps an entire week. Guy comes back a week later. He says, Baruch Hashem, Ha'esyata D'Shmaya. He hands him a wad of cash, $50,000. The guy bursts into tears, gives him a bear hug. He says, how could I ever thank you? He says, don't worry about thanking me. Your father should be gesund. That's all that matters. Takes the money. He says, I'm never going to forget this. Leaves the house, gets into a cab, goes to the airport, flies to Las Vegas, and he gambles all of the money away. There's no father. There's no surgeon. The entire story is a fabrication. Scenario number one. Scenario number two. A guy knocks on the door of the wealthiest Jew in the world. Says to him, Kaplan, my father is deathly ill. My father is deathly ill. Could hope. My father is deathly ill. You need $50,000. Kaplan says to him, go talk to my secretary's secretary. He goes to the secretary knocks on the door. She looks at him, how much do you need? $50,000. She writes out a check. He pays the surgeon. They do the surgery and the father is cured. Rabbi say a question. Which Jew gets greater schar? The Jew in scenario number 1, who tried, he ran, he exerted himself, but he was deceived by a professional con man, or that Kaplan in scenario number 2, who never even picked up the pen to write out the check. But the man who had surgery and he was cured. Who gets greater schar? The answer is, obviously, there are 2 types of schar. There is schar lefum tzara agra, the effort that you put into a mitzvah, and a person was nanas, it wasn't his fault, he was deceived. So he gets all the schar in scenario number 1 for the effort. But there was no tachlis, so his schar is going to be limited. The Kaplan in scenario number 2, who never even picked up the pen to write out the check. So the man is cured, he gets schar for that was his money. And then what happened to that man? He gets off the bed in the hospital. He says, Ribono Shalom gave me a new lease on life. I'm going to devote the rest of my life to Ribono Shalom. So he goes and he opens up a yeshiva, and there are 300 bachrim learning in yeshiva now. Who shares in the schar of every word of Torah that was learned in the yeshiva? That Kaplan who never even picked up the pen to write out the check. And then one of these bachrim becomes a superstar learner, and he marries the daughter of a big Rosh Yeshiva. Let's be dramatic here. A year later they have a baby, and the baby becomes Mashiach. Right? Why not? Why not? We're there, let's bring him. Who shares in the schar of having read that Kaplan and never even picked up the pen to write out the check? That's what's called matan schoron shomitzvahs. Matan schoron shomitzvahs means that when you do a mitzvah, and then there's going to be some sort of chain reaction and a ripple effect, you share in all the, whatever the byproducts are, you have a share, only the Rebbe Shalom knows how the percentages work, you share in the schar of all those mitzvahs. So there's a maisa that's brought down. I saw this once, Rabbi Kron, Rabbi Pesach Kron has this in one of his books. Talks about a Jew who knocks on the door, the shul in Dallas, Texas. Guy knocks on the door. Rabbi, can I speak to you? I'm very busy. I don't have time right now. Rabbi, I want to make a $12,000 donation to your shul. I'm not that busy. Come on in. He comes into the rabbi. He says, here's $12,000. The rabbi says, thank you very much. I want to tell you something. Community has grown. We want to start a school here in the community. And the startup costs of $10,000. We don't have the money. We're in the red. We don't have anywhere near the money. We're going to scrap the project. Your $12,000 will get us started. Once we're started, then it's easier to get donations. I only have one question. Why would you come here, sight unseen, I don't know who you are, and drop $12,000 on me? Guy says, Rabbi, I'll tell you, I am a completely unaffiliated Jew, totally secular. Last month, I went to Israel for the first time. I was on a tour in Israel. We went to many spiritual places. We were in Netanya, we were in Eilat, we were in Tel Aviv. And then on the very last day of the tour guide took us to the wall. And I was at the wall, the Kaisel. The wall. Yeah. And I was standing there and I saw a Yerushalmer Jew, and I saw him davening. And I've never seen anybody pray like that in my life. I was so inspired, I was mesmerized, I couldn't get my eyes off him. I was so inspired by his davening that I then decided that when I get back, I'm going to make a donation to whatever shul I think that this Yerushalmer Jew would belong to in my city, and I figured it would be an Orthodox shul. I opened up the yellow pages, found the name of your shul, here I am, and here's the $12,000. That's the end of the story. Imagine after Meva Esrim, this Yerushalmer Jew comes up. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Beis Shamala, they open up the ledger. It's your judgment day. And here's your schar for Torah, here's your schar for Tefillah, here's your schar for Chesed. As Yerushalmer says, thank you very much for your generosity, but you've got me down there for way much more Torah than I've actually learned. Says, I learned that Daf Yomi, and I did have Chavrusas, but you got me way over. Rosh says, you're absolutely right. That's not what you learned. It's the Torah that was learned in a school in Dallas, Texas. It was built because somebody donated money inspired by watching you davening at the Kaisel. The guy's looking, he says, Rebbeinu Shalom, where is Dallas? Right? So could you imagine? And what was he davening for? I'll give you a hint. He's a man who has 9 daughters. What do you think he was davening for at the Kaisel that day? The last thing he was thinking about was Dallas, Texas. So a person understands that what we're doing here, we're clueless ourselves what the ripple effects are. We have no idea. That person finds out later. But there's an end to the story that even Rabbi Krohn didn't know, which I managed to tell him a couple of years ago. In my kehillah, in my community, we have a tzedakah fund, a local tzedakah fund. So one Shabbos, we made appeals in the various shuls. So I told this story in one of the shuls. My point was that when you give tzedakah, if you give $20 to a family, it's not just the $20 that you gave. If the kids eat a better breakfast that morning and learn better in the cheder, you get schar for their learning also. And if there's better shalom bayis because there's less family tension and pressure because of the money, you get schar, you share in that schar too. And so I told this story, and then one of the other Gaboyim, he heard me tell the story, so he told it in the Hebrew-speaking shul in our neighborhood. After he told the story, a guy walks over, an Avrech walks over to him with 2 children in tow. He says to him, American, he says to the guy, I just want to tell you something. I'm from Dallas, Texas. I learned in that school that you're talking about, and this is the next generation. That's matan schoron shomitzvos. When a person understands that what a person does has a long-term effect, and it's not just the ma'aseh that we're doing now, it's anything that comes as a result, that's matan schoron shomitzvos. Tell you one more story before the next one. There was a, this is also documented in one of Rav Zilberstein's Sfarim. There was a bacher, a Sephardi bacher, went to look up, he was a Yeshivat bacher, he went to look up something in Hebrew University. They used to have, in the old days, they used to have these microfilms that you'd look stuff up on. Nowadays it's all obsolete, obviously. But he goes in after a Seder, he spends the morning looking up some old Sfarim. And at the end of the morning, he's there for a whole morning, he pulls out his lunch and he starts benching. As he benches, he says, Veloni Vosh, Veloni Kalem, Veloni Kashel. And the librarian, young lady, comes over to him, she says, listen, I come from a judicial Sephardi family, there is no such nusach as Veloni Kashel. Yes, there is. No, there isn't. Yes, there is. Getting an argument. He says, listen, I haven't got time to argue with you. I will photocopy a siddur and I'll send it to you and I'll show you there is a nusach that we say, Veloni Kashel, may we not stumble. Okay. He goes home. And it took him a while. A couple months later, he finally remembers, the librarian. He photocopies a big siddur, and he circles in a red marker the words Veloni Kashel, puts it in an envelope, and he sends it off to the librarian at Hebrew University. It's Israel, just write librarian, it'll get there. And so he sends it off. About a year and a half later, he's married, he's living in Bnei Brak, and he's on his way, he gets a wedding invitation. He takes a look, he doesn't recognize the name, not the chosin, not the kala. Figures it's a mistake. He's got a very common name. His name is Shimon Cohen. He figured it was a mistaken identity. The night of the chasna, he happened to be walking past the wedding hall. And he decided he'll check it, see anyway, probably it's not for him, but let's see, maybe, who knows. He walks in, he takes a look, doesn't recognize the soul. Turns around to walk out. The guy grabs him on the shoulder. He says, Slicha, ta Shimon Cohen? He says, yes. He says, the Kala would like to speak to you. He goes, well, this is highly irregular. I'll meet her at the mechitza. So he goes over to the mechitza, the Kala walks over, he says, do you remember me? He goes, no. He goes, well, remember I was the librarian at Hebrew University about a year and a half ago. Remember we had an argument about Veloni Kashel? And said, oh, yeah. So I want to tell you something. At the time I was involved, I had an Arab boyfriend. And a few weeks later, after that meeting, he proposed. He said to me, either you marry me or I dump you. And I went home, I thought over his very romantic proposal, and I realized that with what I had going on in my life at the time, I decided that in spite of everything, I'm going to marry him. On the morning of the day that I was going to say yes, the mail came, and I opened up the envelope, and I pull out a photocopied page of an old siddur with the words Veloni Kashel circled in red. And I thought to myself, ooh, someone is trying to tell me something. So I picked up the phone and I called him up. I said, Walid, you are dumped. And I went to a seminary for Balas Chuvas. Today I'm marrying a Ben Torah, and I want you to know you're the most important guest at the Chasna. All of the Torah that comes out of this family, all of the Chesed, all the Yerushalayim, all the mitzvahs, you share in all of those mitzvahs. That's Matan Sor and Shel mitzvahs. young lady in my neighborhood, there's an older couple that for many years they came to live in Israel. They were living in the United States, and many years they had guests at their home for Shabbos, and they would always ask their guests to write. They have a little guest book. They asked the guests to write something down, write a little bracha. While they were living in Muncie, there was a young man who they had been mekarv. The young man grew up, became a lawyer. In the meantime, this family moved there to Israel. His daughter, when she was 18, she came to Israel for seminary. And she couldn't wait to meet these people who were a legend in her family, the people who were mekarv her father. So she went and she called up, she brought over a couple of her friends, and they went for a Shabbos. After Shabbos, they were leaving, and they asked them to sign the guest book. So she signs the guest book, and then one of her friends signs the guest book, then the third friend signs the guest book, and then they leave. 2 minutes later, she comes running in. She says, I just want to add something, and she adds one line at the bottom. Then they left, and the couple they looked at the guest book. The first thing she wrote, she said, thank you very much for this beautiful Shabbos. And then the first friend wrote, same thing, thank you for the lovely Shabbos. And the third girl wrote, thank you for a wonderful Shabbos. Then they wrote what she wrote at the bottom. She added one line. And for all the other Shabbosim of my life. That's Matan Tzor and Shul Mitzvahs. They were mekarv him, and now there's the next generation. That's Mitzad Echad. There's a phenomenal idea that everybody must know. In Parsha Shlach, Perak Yudalit, Posachov Dalit. It says, Ve'avdi kolei ve'ikev v'yser ruach acheres imo ve'volei acharoi v'aviosi ve'lo eretz asher bo shama v'zaro yorishena. Kolei ben Yefuna is going to get rewarded. He gets a chelik in Eretz Yisrael. He gets to come in and he gets a chelik in Eretz Yisrael. People ask all the time, what's the success rate at Ohr Somayach? By success rate, the assumption is, how many guys have come here and become frum? First of all, it's impossible to know. I've met people who've been here, left here, same way they came in, that years later you meet them, don't even recognize them. The ponytail is gone, the earrings are gone, the two-toned hair color is gone, all of the hair is gone, and the next thing he's got payas, he's got a beard, whatever he's got. At the end of the day, he's from, we have no way of keeping track, we have no way of knowing. The answer is, Ohr Somayach has a 100% success rate. It's a 100% success rate, I'll tell you why. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein Zatzal, in the Drush Moshe, he asks, Kolei ben Yefuna was given a reward from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why was he given such a reward? What happened? The Meraglim came and they were very discouraging. And as soon as the Meraglim were discouraging, the people went, Oy, which was an Avera, because that meant that they've not got faith in Ribbon Shalom. Kolev gets up and says, no, Olo Nala, we can go in. At that point, the people went, yeah. And then the Meraglim said, no, we're going to get to Shmettered if we go in. Oy. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, okay, you're here for 40 years. That's it. Gzeira. So Moshe says, if you look at it, it doesn't look like Kalev accomplished anything. He tried hard, but there was no accomplishment. There was a gzeira that they all die in the midbar. Says Reb Moshe, imagine the following. Imagine you walk into a hospital and you see a doctor is about to pull the plug on a patient who's on a respirator. What we call murder. And the doctor is about to pull the plug. And you grab the doctor's hand and you keep his hand off the plug for a minute. Then he gets his hand loose and he manages to pull the plug and he murders the patient. Did you accomplish anything in that minute that you had his hand off the plug? The answer is yes. It's called Chayei Shah. You kept him alive for a minute. Says Reb Moshe, it's not mistaber that Kolev was rewarded for effort. There had to have been a concrete, tangible accomplishment. And Reb Moshe says, when the people, after Kolev spoke, and the people went from Oy, and they all yelled, yeah, we could do it. Some of those people, at a minimum, some of those people had Hirhurei Tshuva. At the moment that they had Hirhurei Tshuva, that is a concrete, tangible accomplishment. Because the same way that there is Chayei Shah of the Guf, there is Chayei Shah of the Nefesh. That Nefesh was given life for a few minutes. So if a person learns Torah, If a person does a mitzvah, if a person invites somebody to his home for Shabbos, and that person is sitting at a Shabbos table, a secular Jew, who's sitting there for a few moments and feels, this is what I should be doing, that's Hirhurei Tshuva. And even if he never moves one iota in his Yiddishkeit, that was a concrete, tangible accomplishment. That's what Rabbi Moshe says. So a person has to know that we have a responsibility. That's our responsibility. Our responsibility is there are people we have to affect. There's a second side to this. Gemara says that when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was on his deathbed, his Talmidim came in, and they saw Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was crying. He said to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabbeinu, why are you crying? Yochanan ben Zakkai said, listen, it's an eternal din, and I can't bribe the king, and it's an eternal punishment. I don't know which way they're going to take me, up or down. Now, if you stop and think about it, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, the Gemara says, no one ever saw him go Dalet Amos without Torah and Tefillin. That means every time you saw Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, his lips were moving. He was davening. Every time you saw Rabbi Yochanan, he was learning Torah, memorizing, whatever it was, his lips were constantly moving. No, not Dalet Amos without it. On the other hand, the Gemara says, no one ever greeted Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai first. Afilu nochri b'shuk. No one ever beat him to the greeting. Can you imagine Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is walking down the street, there's a construction worker with no shirt eating a McDonald's burger, and he's got a beer in one hand and a Marlboro in the other hand, and good morning, Roy. He beats him to it. Oh, good morning, Rabbeinu. Right? Gets to the next guy. Good morning, Roy. Roy's always a good guess for a name for a construction worker. Right? Good morning, Roy. No one ever beat him. So what do you want? In Bein Adam L'Makom, he's perfect. In Bein Adam L'Chavero, he's perfect. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai doesn't know which way they're taking him. How could that be? The answer is, if you look at the Gemara, you know when he started crying? When he saw, the Gemara says, when he saw the Talmidim, that's when he started crying. Because Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai sees the Talmidim. For himself, he understood where he was holding. But what about the Talmidim? Was the Masorah transmitted properly? Did they get the limud properly? Were they influenced properly? Did they distort something, he said? And if they distorted it and pass it on, he bears a certain level of responsibility. Because the same way that there's a ripple effect for the good, there are also consequences for a negative effect. So, we have an achrayus to transmit the Torah properly. A person who says, but I'm not a teacher, I'm not in a classroom, I'm not a Rebbe. Every single person sitting here is a teacher. Every single person here, because the same way, if you've ever been in a group full of people, don't you ever look around the room and you kind of glance and you're looking, noticing this one and noticing that one and observing this one and observing that one. And a person thinks to himself, you know what, I'm a pretty good observer. And what he doesn't know is there's another guy looking at him thinking, look who thinks he's a good observer. Right? Because the observer is being observed. That means we're being watched all the time, the same way we notice others, others notice us. So a person has to know that you are a teacher. People are watching you. And as Rav Kluglin mentioned, that a person's actions, when you put on a yarmulke or you put on a hat, and it doesn't matter what color hat you wear, as long as it's black. A person, as soon as you put on any form of religious uniform, you now carry a responsibility to affect others. And your behavior is what the people are going to be looking at. There was a guy who, about Tshuva, they asked him, how did you become frum? He said he was completely secular. He was sitting with a bunch of friends in Dizengoff Square in Tel Aviv, one of the more spiritual places in Israel. And they were sitting in a restaurant. And he noticed there was an 18-year-old yeshiva bocher who was cutting across Dizengoff Square. And he looked out the window and he saw this yeshiva bocher, and he saw he was looking straight down. And he said to his friends, 1 second, I want to see something. He said later he followed this yeshiva bocher all the way across, and not once did he see him pick his eyes up off the ground. He said if there's a force in the Bria, a koch in the Bria, that could get an 18-year-old male to keep his eyes down in Dizengoff, he must find out what it is. And as a result of that, he investigated and he became frum. That bocher is a teacher. that Bacher has a Talmud. That's what it means that we are all teachers. Young lady got on an El Al flight. She sat down, and as soon as she sat down, a steward came over to her and said, "Excuse me, young lady, are you traveling alone?" She goes, "Yeah." Gets nervous. El Al, security. He goes, "So who was that little old lady back in the terminal? You were moving her bags around for the last hour and a half. Who was that?" She goes, "I don't know. It was a little old lady. I thought she needed help. I didn't know there was anything wrong." He says, "Can I ask you a question? Are you religious?" She goes, "Yeah." He goes, "We thought so. Because only a religious girl would do something like that. And because you showed us that you have so much class, we're putting you in first class for the entire flight." You like that, huh? Yeah. The fact that she gets a schar for the Kiddush Hashem that even Malachim can't imagine, I mean, that's nice. But first class on a plane, you know, there's Gan Eden, and just above Gan Eden is the first class section of a plane. Then it's worth it. So if you go to the airport, find somebody with bags, right? Now, I would love to tell you, know how these stories always used to end in NCSY, you know, and that steward became from, you know, that steward was me. You know, that's how the stories always end. It wasn't, and I don't know what happened to him. But one thing is clear, she's being watched. She's being watched. We have Talmudim. So a person has to know we have an achrayus. Kiruv rechokim, kiruv krovim. People are responding to us more based on who we are and what we do than what we say. And if we treat people well, and we show people that a Torah Jew is someone who is pleasant, someone who they would like to spend time around, somebody who is willing to open their home to them, that's a form of education. That's a form of chinuch. Most have never, ever seen it. And so a person has to know, had a lady told me, she used to make Shabbosim for her family. And they always had guests, dozens of guests all the time, friends of a friend, like Rechokim, Krober, everybody. She was already getting a little older. She was late 60s. And she said she's ready to pass the torch to the next generation. So she went and she said, we're going to have our first quiet Shabbos in years. So she and her husband decided, that's it, no guests for Shabbos. Thursday night, the phone rang. Ohr Somayach Beis Medrash was having a Shabbaton in Telstone, where this couple lives. And one of the Rebbeim calls up, the phone rings, the lady knew before, she had Thursday night phone's ringing, what could it be? Can you have a couple of guys for Shabbos? She decided, all right, we'll make it next Shabbos, we'll start our quiet Shabbos, and she has the guests. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Friday, the Rav walks in with the two Bachrim from the Beis Medrash, and as soon as they walk into the house, one of the Bachrim starts going, This is the house, this is the house, this is the house. He said to them, calm down, what's your problem? This is the house, this is the house. I said, what are you talking about? He says, I got to Israel 3 years ago. They took us on a Shabbaton to some small little town. I don't remember what the name of the town was, but it was Telstone. And we went to a house for Shabbos. I don't remember whose house it was at the time. I had no idea. I just remember it was a Shabbos meal. It was unbelievable. And I decided I'm coming to the yeshiva because of that. And this is the house where it took place. The lady told me she dropped her plans for the quiet Shabbos. So sometimes you invite somebody to your house for Shabbos, you know, maybe it wasn't so inspiring. The challahs weren't as light as the Ananei HaKavod. One fell off the table and cracked the tile. And maybe the conversation was a bit stilted, and it wasn't magnificent. You might have thought it wasn't magnificent, but there might very well be somebody there thinking that it was magnificent. And finally, which means I'm nowhere near ending, by the way, but I am. So I just want to tell you one last thing. I don't want to take up too much time. We have a very special guest, a dear friend of mine, Rav Kirsch, who is responsible for literally thousands of people having become Balei Tshuvas in England. It's probably embarrassed for me to be saying this right now, but I don't care. And he's responsible for most of the kiruv that you find in England and all of the ripple effects that have spun off. So I don't want to take up too much of his time, but now that I complimented him, he won't mind. So, just 2 points very quickly. The first is, I told you I'm an American, I could get away with anything. The first is that we don't compromise when we're doing kiruv, when we do chinuch. There's no compromise. Have a Hillel Omer, have a mekarvan the Torah, bring the Torah to them, don't bring them to the Torah. So bring them to the Torah, sorry. Have a mekarvan the Torah, bring them to the Torah, don't bring the Torah to them. That means we're not allowed to compromise, bend, or change the Torah. It's not ours to negotiate. It's HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Torah. Bring the people and show them the beauty of Torah. We can't take the Torah to them and change it and water it down. Obviously, you could bring the Gemara to them. But the rest of the Torah, to change it, to make it palatable for 21st century people, that's not our job. We're not allowed to do that, number one. And number two, bring them to Talmud Torah. Get them into the taste of Torah. Let them taste Hama Or Shabo Yachzirena Lamutav. Finally, I have a young man in my neighborhood. Young man, he's my age. And he's an Israeli Baal Tshuva. And today he's a posek, he's a Rosh Kolol. This young man was born and raised on a secular left-wing anti-religious kibbutz. So I once asked him, and I knew that he had been a pilot in the Israeli Air Force. So I once asked him, what was it that got you, that changed your life? We were standing after shul, we both had our talesim on, I'll never forget this. He said to me that he was on this kibbutz, and one day there was a traffic accident, 3 sets of parents were killed on this kibbutz. Short while later, the daughter of one of those sets of parents went off to a seminary to become a Balas Tshuva. Everybody on the kibbutz just assumed she was emotionally traumatized. Who else would become from? In the meantime, he left the kibbutz. Brilliant young man. He went to the Israeli Air Force and he was flying F-15s. A year and a half later, young lady, 2 years later, young lady got engaged. She's marrying a Ben Torah. And the kibbutz got an invitation. So he told me he went down there with his friends from the Air Force. And the entire way, they were making jokes about the way he put it, they were laughing at Yeshiva Bacharols. Yeshiva Bacharols are a bunch of turtles in a shell. They don't know what's going on in the world. They're a bunch of draft dodgers, the usual tiresome tirade. And he said they were joking and joking. They got to the chassan, they're still joking. And then they had the Kabbalah's punning, they're still making jokes. They had the chuppah, they're still making jokes. The chassan kal went off to the yichud room, they're still making jokes. And then at a certain point, somebody says, the chassan and kal are coming out, get ready for dancing. So he told me he was standing there, and everybody in the room got up. The yeshiva bachrim, the friends of the chassan, all moved to one side of the room to be makabel, play a chassan, to dance with him. His people, his relatives, his kibbutz people moved to the other side. They weren't having any of it. They weren't interested. He told me he was standing there, and he looked at the contrast. He looked at the yeshiva bachrim, and he looked at his people. And he thought to himself, Zeh chai v'zeh met. V'ani rotzeh lichyot. Ani rotzeh lichyot. He said the decision, looking at the Yeshiva Bachra, the golden faces, the purity on the Yeshiva Bachra, they're alive. He said that's life. And he saw it in the washed out people, his people who are not yet from. And he said, there's nothing there. He told me the decision was made instantaneously. There was a guy there who was an Israeli makarver. Now these guys are good, because he saw the lights go on in his eyes. So he came zipping across, and he comes over to him. He says, "Okay," starts talking about proving that we don't come from gorillas, and there's no big bang in it. He says, "I don't need that. Just tell me how to do it." He says, "Yeah, but I can convince you." I don't need to be convinced. I'm convinced already. Today, he's a posek in Rosh Kolol. Rabbi Sai, every one of you right now is somebody who is not only potentially able to inspire others to grow as Torah Jews. That encompasses the whole thing. Rechokim, krogim, chinuch, it's all the same. Educate the uneducated. Show them the beauty of Torah. Convince them, tamu uru ki tov Hashem.